Welcome to Roundtable Mindset, the podcast where we seek to understand and share different perspectives in order to grow and challenge our own. And we encourage you, our guest, to do the same.
Each week, we will pick a topic to discuss, sharing our own unique thoughts and insights. There will be times when we won't agree, and let's be real, that's probably going to be most of the time, and that's okay. We feel it's important to understand that we can live in this polarized world and still respect one another and even be friends.
Well, hello and welcome back to Roundtable Mindset. This is Jamie.
And I'm Malin.
And we're back for an all-new episode of Roundtable Mindset, where we are going to do some deep dive into some exciting things. See,
You were able to get in there after all. I was wondering. I was
hoping.
Today's episode I'm really excited about. Hey, look, I just said the same word.
Way to go.
Because I know this is going to be an episode where we crack open the heart of what we've been focusing on for, what is it now? Almost a year? Almost a year at this point?
We're getting close.
Getting real close. Which is a milestone in and of itself. But yeah, this episode for me is kind of the culmination of what we've been doing for the last year, kind of being summarized, if you will. That's kind of how I'm looking at it.
Yeah, I'm excited to get there. But before we do, I guess, how are things in your world? I hear things, Malin.
So I know a while back we were waiting for the other shoe to drop, and the other shoe, from a professional perspective, has finally dropped. So this week, in particular, has been very trying in a lot of different fronts. My personal life is still fine. My work life is a dumpster fire rolling down the street uncontrollably, almost going into an orphanage. Like, that's how my world has been so far. Like, it's not neat and tidy like it normally is. It's hair on fire kind of time, which makes life a little bit harder because I spend, realistically, I spend anywhere between 8 and 13 hours a day working. So the majority of my day is constantly under fire, under stress. And so that it's been hard. And then how to balance that between my personal life and how do I leave my work at my work and then turn around and have, fun with my family and not bring that home with me, especially while I'm working from home, is a difficult balance. It's very difficult.
I was going to say, it sounds like the shoe didn't just drop. The chunkla hit you upside the head is what it sounds like.
Yeah. And the type of work that I do, it is very cyclical. So there are times when there's not a lot going on because of where we are in the development of products for our business partners. And then there's times where it is all hands on deck. We have to move this now. Everybody jump in. And that's where I'm at. The difference between this and other times is I see this as kind of being a prolonged time period where I'm going to be in this for probably, I will say, the next 1 to 2 months at the low end. So it's going to be a trying time. So that's what's going on in my world. Personal life, like I said, everything's fine. The family's doing good. Wife's doing good. I'm doing good. It's just this other part of me that's having the issues. So what about you? What's going on with you?
Well, I had a major personal victory in that we all know that I'm no longer empty nesting, and both of my kids were home and both of them ate food that I cooked, which I don't think has happened since like 2015. So I was pretty excited about that. It was like we were all together, we all had food, and they ate my cooking for the first time in a long time. So that was kind of cool.
That brings a smile to my face because I remember you saying specifically they don't eat your food anymore.
Yeah.
And yeah, to be able to have a meal that you've cooked and put time in and everybody ate it, that's pretty impressive because we're in that life where our kids, some of them will eat some of the things we make. One of them will not eat anything that we make. So take the victory, my friend. Take it.
Well, and here's the funny thing. I know that this is not some challenge because the episode that I said that in hasn't even released at the time of this recording. So I know that this was a genuine interaction and it wasn't them trying to prove me wrong or something, which is awesome. So it was a good week at my house this week.
No reverse psychology used here. This was actual results.
Yes. No manipulation happened for the betterment of my kids. Anyway.
See, look at you using your emotional intelligence in a very useful way. Manipulation.
Growth is good. So.
Yes, it is.
Anyway, do you have some food for thought for us?
I do. So today's food for thought is, can you be considered trustworthy if you aren't honest with yourself?
Oh.
And this comes from a listener. So a listener provided this to our text message. So thank you for submitting that. And I think it's a very interesting question. On the surface, I read this and I was like, I don't know. And then the more I've been chewing on this, I think it goes a little bit deeper for me now.
Well, I'm not going to lie. I think that I originally was like, well, no, because clearly you have to be honest with yourself, right? I'm super glad that you put this out on Facebook, though, because it did give me that opportunity to chew on it for a few days. And I really think that there are times that we deceive ourselves for protection is what I was like, wait a second. No, I think there are times where we lie to ourselves. That can be a way to kind of protect like a self-protective factor. I think that to me, it would draw into trustworthiness. If I'm aware that I'm lying to myself, if I'm aware that I'm like floating down the river of denial, then maybe that's a trustworthy thing. But I do think that there are times where we can't look at it yet. We can't face it yet, or we're not ready to be honest with ourselves about that yet. But that doesn't mean it won't happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So this is kind of where I've landed. I'm trying to summarize because I'm hearing what you're saying, and I think it touches on some of the things that I've been thinking about. So I'm just going to try to roll this one up. For me, I think if I read this the way that it was presented to us, I'm looking at this as really, and this is Malin interpreting, but can I be considered trustworthy with other people's information? I added that. If I'm not being honest with myself. And to me, the answer is yes. Self-deception has in my opinion, self-deception has no bearing on how well I'm able to keep other people's secrets or personal information. You know, I can be a confidant for somebody else, even though I can't be honest with myself in the mirror. So I don't see that there is a correlation really between me, I'll say, lying to myself or being self-deceptive, and still being able to be that rock or be there for somebody else. And when I say that out loud, it's very contradictory, right? Like, how can you not have the same practice for yourself? And it's not that I'm saying I don't ever do this. Like, I have lied to myself. I have kidded myself before, right? I've looked the other way because I don't want to have to take the time to look at the ugliness within or the things that I need to change, for whatever reason. But that never once clouded my ability to be trustworthy for people outside of myself in other relationships. So I'm not taking you through my mindset or my mind process this week, Jamie, but I'm just kind of boiling it up to this is where I'm landing with this question.
The funny thing is that I think that we, in different situations and with different people, I think we can do different things. You know what I'm saying? For instance, I know like some banks will do like a credit check before you're able to be a checker, like a cashier at their bank, right? And to me, that's an example of that. Like, I might be struggling in my personal life, but that doesn't mean that I won't go to work and be trustworthy and above par in the bank and make sure that all that money is there. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to mismanage your money because my job is to manage it the way you tell me to. And so to me, this is kind of the same thing. Like, just because I am, just because in my personal life you see this, and this, that doesn't mean that in my professional life I don't, I can't behave in this way or conduct myself in this way, or in my friendships that I don't conduct myself in this way. You know what I'm saying? I feel like we all have kind of a capacity to compartmentalize those things and act accordingly by what's expected.
Okay, so now that you've said that, I do need to crack open this walnut a little bit to just show some of the things that I've gone through.
Okay.
So one of the differences that I'm seeing with this, can I be considered trustworthy if I'm not honest with myself question is there really is no opportunity for me to not know the truth, even if I'm not being honest with myself. I know both sides of the equation. I know the truth and I know the facts that I'm going to omit. Because I can't really lie to myself internally. I can deny the truth, but I can't sit there and say I don't know the truth because it's within my own head. The difference for me is when you are actively lying or being deceitful to somebody who doesn't have the opportunity to know the truth, that's where you cannot be trustworthy. So that's where I really landed on my summary was I can't lie to myself. I know the truth because I can't hide it from myself. I just decide not to either focus on it or I actively choose to ignore it. But by doing that, that's me, being that self-deceptive. And that doesn't have anything to do with the secrets and me being truthful and honest with somebody that's outside of me. That is a big difference between, for me, for this question, that is one of the big differences. The other person doesn't have the opportunity to know the truth. And if you choose to lie to them, that's when you're not trustworthy. Or you hold that truth back from them.
Yeah. And I get where you're coming from with that. I guess I would challenge that just a tiny bit because I think about things like addiction, right? Until addiction becomes a problem for me, it's not something that I'm even aware of, right? Like there is a state of pre-contemplation where I'm not aware that it's a problem or it's not really a problem for me. Does that make sense? So that's kind of the lens I came to this question with also is like, and not regarding addiction, but even any change, before we make a change, we need to be aware that we need to make a change, right? And I have been in spaces where I'm like, oh, I didn't even realize that was doing this to me. And so, I think that happens on a unconscious level almost that, I can lie to myself without, I guess, knowing it's a lie because this isn't causing me any pain, even though 10 people around me can say, look at all the ways this is causing you pain. And it takes some awareness, like it takes some conscious awareness of that. And the only reason I think that is because I've been there. So I guess that's the one space I would challenge you. And I feel like I've gone through life and there's several times that I've stumbled upon something and I'm like, oh, that is a really ugly thing in me. And I don't like that. I don't want to be that person and I want to change that. But it's like, I didn't even know it was there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. But if my counter to that is if you truly didn't know that it was there, how can you ask the question, are you being honest with yourself? Because to me, that implies if you know what the truth is and you're choosing not to be honest with yourself means you know that there's something there. The example that you're giving is almost like there's no awareness that that's even an issue. So there's no truth or honesty to hold on to. And I know I'm really dissecting the words here, but that would be my only thing is the question implies that there is something that you are holding back from yourself, but you have to be aware that it's there in order to hold it back from yourself.
Here's a quick example. You ever experienced this thing where you really can't stand someone because of something that they do? And you can't figure it out, but then at some point it like hits you like a frying pan. It's because you do the same thing. You know what I mean? Like, have you not experienced that? Maybe it's just a me thing.
I have. There's traits in other people that drive me absolutely nuts, and then it either is brought to my attention or through self-realization, I see that I am doing the same things that they're doing.
that to me is an example of one of those times where maybe I'm completely blind to it, but I could point it out in anybody else. You know what I'm saying? So I do feel like there is some self-deception there, but I don't feel, maybe it's the intent. That maybe that's what I'm going after, is that, I'm not trying to lie to myself. It's not like I'm like, yeah, I see this, but I'm pretending like it's not really there, but at the same time, we must be aware that it's there on some level. So maybe it's the intent. Like, I'm not intentionally trying to deceive myself. It's just happening and I'm not aware of it. Well, I don't know.
I don't know about you, but there's been plenty of times in my life that I'm like slapped in the face with reality. And I know that this is something that needs to be worked on. And I just actively push it out. Like, I'll deal with that later, or it's not that big of a deal. And to me, that is the heart of this question, right? That is truth that I know that I am just ignoring or pushing out. But I think the question for me still stands. If you don't know it's there, is there really, how are you going to be honest with yourself if you don't even recognize it's there? It might be there, but if you don't know it, is that really you not being honest with yourself, or is that you not being aware? I think there's a difference.
Yeah, there could be. It's a good question. I love it.
It is a good question.
I love these questions and appreciate all the feedback from those of you that participated. So thanks.
Thank you, listener, for bringing that to us. Again, I read that and I was like, I answered it in 20 seconds. And then I stopped and I really started to think about the different options, the different scenarios in my life. And yeah, it kind of exploded on me. I wasn't expecting it. I thought this was going to be truthfully like a 5-minute conversation. And we've been talking almost 20 minutes on it. So
yeah. Well, thanks for the food for thought. Let's, I'm kind of excited. I really want to shift over to our topic today. So I'm gonna grab one of those hooks for the people off the stage, and pull us back. So
where's our Oscar music? Is it that where they start playing the piano?
Oh yeah. We so need Oscar. Why have we not thought of that before? Anyway. Okay. So today we wanted to talk a little bit, if you have listened to our podcast for any length of time, you go back and listen to the intro, right? The podcast where we seek to understand and share new perspectives in order to grow and grow and challenge our own, right? That's our whole intro. So today we wanted to talk a little bit about that. And I feel like you and I talk about this topic a lot. I don't know that I talk about this topic with other people as much as I talk about it with you, like where our perspective comes from. How do we shift our perspective? What value is there in shifting our perspective, right? And as we're coming to the close on a whole year of this exciting adventure journey that we've taken together, I thought this would be a good time to kind of talk about this. And you had kind of posed this, and we've sort of tennis balled this thing back and forth a few times to talk about how we're going to do this. But this is where we're going as we close our first year in podcasting. So
yeah. So the light bulb moment for me, as you've kind of set up there, was we've done a lot of conversations around how do we expand our perspectives? How do we challenge our perspectives? I remember our first conversation that we had when we were like, hey, let's put a podcast together. And we both kind of landed on perspective sharing and the importance of expanding our own perspectives really quickly, because we both have our own unique backstory that we've shared. And we're passionate about that because we've both seen benefits and we've both seen heartache and we've both seen a lot of negative and a lot of positive when that is either neglected or done really well. And so that was really, I remember that was where we kind of bonded over this podcasting really quickly. But you're right. I don't think there's a lot of people in my life who really actively stop and think about the perspective that they're creating. And the light bulb for me, and I know we've been talking about this, has been even so far in this year, we've talked a lot about, hey, I want to learn other people's perspectives, which is a great thing. There's no small feat in that either, sharing different perspectives. But we never really talked about how do we create our own perspective? What goes into the perspective that we are sharing with the world? Mm-hmm. And so I came across the table and I started looking at this from the other side of it, saying, I've only been really interested in focusing on how I can gain other people's perspective so I can sharpen or challenge or shift mine. I've not ever really thought about what is the perspective that I'm sharing with other people that are trying to do the same thing, intentionally or not? And that's where this idea really kind of took root for both of us, I think. And that's, if you really take a step back, I'm kind of surprised that it's taken us almost a year to even come up with this idea to start talking about how do we even, what goes into building somebody's perspective.
Right. Well, and it's funny because I feel like, well, kind of like we were talking about during Food for Thought, I think that some of these things are super implicit, like riding a bike. Once you learn how to ride a bike, you don't even think about, you don't have to tell your leg, okay, pedal, pedal, pedal. You just do it because you know how to do it. And I feel like our perspectives are kind of like that. It's just implicit. It just happens underneath the surface. And it's kind of automatic that we have come to this space. And I've known a lot of people where that can sometimes be a wall or a barrier to hearing other perspectives, because this is my opinion, this is how I was raised, and this is where it stops for me. And so, yeah, I think if we can stop and really, first of all, recognize that our perspective comes from someplace, and then maybe look at what brings us to our perspective, I feel like that helps us be more intentional about building our perspective or expanding it or doing some perspective sharing and things like that.
Well, we should have really started off telling everybody we're going to use the word perspective a lot. So, luckily don't use this episode as like a drinking game or anything, because it will not last long. That's for sure.
Or do. Because that's fun.
You will not. You'll be under the table real quick. And the other thing is, I feel like these are a lot of our opinions and things that we've gone through. Again, just a reminder: we're not doctors, we're not psychologists, we're not, we don't have licenses in anything that will give us kind of any mental health care. But I do think that we have, we do have a perspective that we've been talking through, and we do have this lens in life that we've been trying to navigate. And I think that's also important. And I just wanted to take a moment to kind of just express that, because a lot of what I'm going to say in today's episode is really me unpacking my understanding and my belief of the importance of creating a perspective that I can share with individuals. And one of the things that you asked Jamie early on in this conversation was, where does perspectives come from? And if I sat there for a second and really understood or planned to think through, where does my perspective start from? It starts from me growing up in a family. I mean, it's almost been there from the very beginning of just like learning how to breathe. Nobody really had to teach you how to breathe. You just know how to breathe. Your perspective starts being shaped, in my opinion, from the very earliest moments of cognitive ability, where you are pulling in pieces of the surroundings around you. You are going through events, although it may be smaller than it will be later on in life. And you are pulling all these pieces together, and you're structuring a perspective that you're going to start looking through the world. And I think that's where it starts for all of us. And then it's a matter of how much importance do we give to our perspectives? And do we really even take the time to understand how we can evolve, shape, sharpen, transform our perspectives as we grow through life? Because as I look at myself, I really was not paying attention to shifting my perspective or understanding how I can look at the world differently. It wasn't until I actually went off to college that I was doing some reflection, and that was the earliest time that I remember really stopping and thinking about, wow, my world is opening, and I want to experience what all these other individuals have experienced, and I want to know how their lives work and operate. That was the first moment in my life where my perspective really I almost became aware of it, because it was so narrow compared to the people that I was seeing around me, and the rich experiences that they were bringing to the college life as well. It really started to challenge me to say, there is more out there. There's more ways to look at the world than what I was doing, and all of that starts from how I was raised and where I was growing up. So, to me, that's where I would like to start. Is I feel like the bedrock of everybody's perspective comes from that home dynamic, that family dynamic that we are raised in.
Well, and on some level, you have to say, duh, right? Like, I mean, if I really think about it, right? when I think about, who I am today is because of the family and the family culture that I was raised in, right? But I think what was valuable for me in thinking through this question was really taking a second to think about, okay, so this is my core belief system today. Where did I see that in my family? Where did I see that with my parents? How did they grow that in me? And so one example I have two, one with each parent. My mom, she was like, if I had to pick a place that I learned empathy from, it was probably my mom, because she would see the kid down the street that, had a hole in their shoes for a couple of weeks, and she would go and buy that kid a pair of shoes. It's just the person that she was, and part of that for me in seeing that was her sharing those stories with me. It probably wasn't super. It's not like I was in a space developmentally where I'm like, oh, I can think about something outside of myself. But the fact that my mom would share that stuff with me, I think helped me start seeing an insight to that. You know what I mean? And that today, even now, is like, it's a core value that not only I built my career out of helping people, right? But it's also something that I've worked really hard at instilling in my kids. We went and would volunteer to do different things or adopt families for Christmas now and then and stuff like that. So like that civil responsibility is something that it is in my fibers, right? I think of my dad, and I don't know if you remember when I started going to like the little parochial religious school that I went to. Do you remember that? I think it was like fourth grade or something. I went there and it was very religious. It was a very religious based school. And I remember taking my science book home, and I was doing my science homework or showing my dad my book or something. And I remember he was flipping through, and they were teaching one concept of how the world came to be, and there wasn't much mention of any other concepts of how the world came to be, and he became very upset. He was like, there is a science book with Bible verses in it, and he was really frustrated by that. So, from that moment, I remember really this ability to ask questions and to challenge what I'm being taught. And it was like an ability or the beginning of not accepting what's being served to me, and to ask questions and find out why and learn more about it so I can formulate my own opinion, right? Because that's what he did with me in that example. Is he brought other things to the table and he said, okay, look, here's what you're being presented with. What do you think? And that is also something that I've worked really hard to instill in my kids. So those are a couple of examples of for me, where I can really go back and say, okay, this is how my perspective has been shaped in this. Have you, I guess, in going back through that, have you thought of things or seen things that way, where it's like you go beyond the duh to the, okay, this is how it's practical and how it's worked out?
Well, in my example about going to college, that was my real first chance of seeing different perspectives. I go back into my childhood, and I made that comment earlier that my family dynamic. I mean, my mom and my dad were very strong presence in my life and the way that I grew up. And some of the things that they instilled in me, to your point, I can see now that I'm using those even as a career, because with my family, my mom and dad, it was really important for them to say, challenge everything. Don't be afraid to ask questions. If you don't understand something, Malin, ask it. When I was a kid, they even instilled in me, don't be afraid to talk to adults. Be respectful, but you can ask them any question you want. If you have a question, don't be shy. And that's part of who part of the perspective I guess I gained when I was living at home was I had that ability to ask questions. I also learned really quickly that when I was talking to my parents, doesn't mean I enjoy the answers they give me, but that's not something they promise. They promise that I could ask the question, which is also another perspective shift that I had to have, growing up, is that you can ask the questions, but doesn't mean you're going to like the answer. And what do you do with that information? So again, that's another valuable little tidbit. But no, I agree. I think growing up, that's really where all of this starts coming from. And what we are able to do with it, I think matters. I don't know if a lot of people spend time consciously thinking about the perspective and how they can shift it and constantly make it broader or refine it. But maybe the difference is, and again, I'm speculating, so I don't need any upset emails, please. But I'm wondering if that's the difference. We both had childhoods where where it was open, it was safe, and it was almost expected to say, challenge, think through things, bring different perspectives together. When you are presented with one fact, if it doesn't sit with you for whatever reason, go looking, go try to find something. And I think that's valuable. And I think that's a valuable tool that I even use today. And again, one that I've instilled into my children. Faith is really big and important to us. And we have those honest conversations because my faith and my wife's faith, we've made a conscious effort to not just say, well, this is your faith because we believe it, so should you. It's really, let's have a conversation. We presented one option to you. What don't you understand or what don't you like about it? But what questions do you have? But let's discuss. And I just think that is such an important tool for people to learn and to know. And again, this is kind of a dumb moment too. Like, I don't think I'm saying anything revolutionary, but that's the thing that I keep falling back on, is that's the difference. I've met other people in my life who don't really give their perspectives even a second thought. Mm-hmm. And I often wonder to myself, is that because they were raised in a home where it wasn't important to really look and challenge perspective or really look for an answer that you believe rather than just having one served up to you? I don't know. I'm speculating, but I do know that was a very important piece of my childhood and how my parents raised me that I have used almost through my entire life. And I see that as maybe that is one place where it differentiates people maybe from using being able to see their perspective and just kind of living with their perspective.
Yeah. Well, and that's not to say that we're stuck with that, right? Like, I think there are things that, of course, I'm having a harder time thinking of examples of that, but I think there are things or principles or traditions that I was raised with where those aren't things that I follow through with now, right? So that I don't think that's concrete, I guess, is what I'm saying. I think the beauty is that as we grow, we get to take those perspectives and we get to measure it and we get to reflect on it and we get to look at it compared to what we're experiencing and what we're seeing in the world around us and decide if that's something that we're going to continue to allow to affect our perspective. So the other piece of that is that lived experience. We see that as kids, we grow up, we practice those perspectives that we learned as kids, and then they start to shift a little bit too.
So my question for you then is what impacts your perspective? Is it just events that happen to us as we're growing up? Or can we somehow obtain information and perspectives and shift our own without having any of that lived experience?
One of the biggest values I have gotten in my work is being able to experience on some level what others are experiencing, right? So you knew empathy had to come into this somewhere.
Oh, here it is, everyone. Welcome back to the table, empathy.
Right. Your favorite topic. No, but for real, I think that some of the things that have affected my perspective is walking with families as they're experiencing various things or supporting them as they're working really hard to overcome different things or whatever. There's such a huge, and whatever really is a not fair way of summing all of that up because it's all big life stuff. And those experiences that I watch people go through and that I sit beside them as they're working through, those perspectives impact me in a great way. And I think it's definitely part of what has led me to where I'm at too. I also think that there are some perspectives that you can't fully appreciate until you experience them, right? One example I was thinking of is like in parenting. So I had this whole different perspective of what my parents did and how that impacted me. And then when I started going through some of those similar situations with my own children, it was like, oh, now I understand what they were experiencing. I get it now, sorry, Jamie, I can't buy you that brand new car that you really want. You don't really love me. And then here I am, fast forward 25 years later. And I'm sorry, honey, I can't buy you that brand new car that you really want. And 4 of your friends have. Oh, you really don't love me, right? So I think that's one of those examples that's really kind of showed me how living through those things will shift our perspective too. Was that the question? I guess did I answer your question?
Well, you gave a lot of really good examples around events, but my question is there, and I think the answer is yes for me. So here's the question. I'm going to give you my answer first. The answer that I believe is yes. The question again, can you have experiences, can you shift your perspective without having experiences? So can you, without having any real life or lived experiences or events happen to you, can you grow or shift or change your perspective?
I can go with yes. I don't know. What examples do you have?
Well, so I have an example through a conversation. So I thought this was really, really important. So I was talking to my wife about our podcast, and we talk about a lot of different episodes. And this episode came up. And so we had a conversation around perspective shifting. And some of the things she said was, well, you really don't have an opportunity to shift your perspective until an event happens to you. And I challenged that. And I said, well, but there's been a lot of time that I've spent on trying to think, how can I broaden my perspective by finding opportunities to either interact with individuals I normally don't. I mean, this podcast is a good example. I've talked to individuals through this that I would probably never pick up the phone and talk to. And that's been very vital, but that's me looking for those opportunities. And in some ways, that's me creating those opportunities. But I was thinking about that before it happened to me. And so that's kind of where this conversation came from, is that she was in the camp of, well, you need an event in order for your perspective to shift, because through those events, your perspective will change because of what you've just gone through. And I see it just a little bit different. I'm not disagreeing that that's not a way. That's a very valid way for that to happen. And I have experienced that firsthand. The parenting was a really good one. The loss of my mother was another big one. I have a whole different perspective now for individuals that are going through loss. Not that I couldn't understand that was a sad time for them, but it hits me in a more personal way. And I'm able to actually relate with individuals a lot better now because my perspective was able to be really shifted in a whole new way. Where I'm sitting at is there are opportunities, like I said with the podcast, that I'm looking for. Are there individuals that I can start interacting with and having conversations with that I normally wouldn't, just so I can start getting a lens of how they see the world? And then what can I glean from that? So I do think the answer is yes. I don't think you need to have an event happen to you in order for you to be able to shift your perspective. And I don't think that is an idea that a lot of people hold true, though. I think that's something that just, I don't want to say a unique few, because that seems like it's too, exclusive. But I don't think it's the norm. I don't think it's normally what people just gravitate towards to say, wow, my life is going well. There's really no rocks in the road. Let me dig up a unnecessary rock and throw it in front of me. Because there's been times when I've shifted my perspective where it has felt like I'm getting in my own way. For what benefit? Well, it's the benefit of trying to broaden my own understanding of the world around me. And I find value in that. And I find that to be a very useful tool in a lot of areas of my life. But I do have to say, the times when it's outside of an event impacting me, it's almost me literally digging up rocks to throw them in my way. So I have to slow down, or I have to crawl over them, or I have to do something a little bit different, if that makes sense to you.
Well, and it does. And I think part of what I was going with is that I have allowed the experiences of others to shape my perspective in some ways too, because I was seeking it, like you were talking about. You know what I'm saying? So those aren't events that happened to me. They're events that happened to somebody else. But because I was open to it, I was able to understand a perspective about an event that was outside of me, something that I couldn't experience and something that I wasn't part of. I guess another thought that I have about that is what we choose to allow in, or who we choose to be around, That's not necessarily events to me. You know, when I think of events, I think of traumatic events. I think of happy events. I think of, things like that. But who I choose to spend my time with can have a big impact on our perspective too.
So I think you just said this, but a light bulb kind of went off in my head. So are you able, because I think I am, but are you able to pick and choose what perspectives then you'll allow to kind of come in and apply to your own perspective? Because you can have interactions with individuals, but that doesn't mean you're going to adopt their perspective, because what you're seeing them as being, I'll use the word wrong, or not what you want to do with your life. You can still appreciate and have empathy for them, but that doesn't mean you're going to adopt. So, here's another question. Can you have interactions and your perspective be unchanged? Or if with every interaction we have with somebody, is our perspective being touched?
I think our perspective is touched in every interaction we have with things like that. Whether we choose to accept what that lesson might be, or to then incorporate that into the fiber of our values and ethics and who we are, I think that is something we have a choice in. But I don't know that you can walk away from even a negative interaction or an experience that stretches your perception about something that you don't agree with. I don't know that you can walk away from that and not be touched by that in some way. You think about reality shows, right? I'm trying to think of an example. I work better in metaphor, okay? But if I think about
Grey's Anatomy,
that's not a reality show. Or is it? No, I'm just kidding. But you think about like reality TV. I watched one and it was like Morgan Spurlock. I think it was Morgan Spurlock that did it. And it was it was after the whole like Super Size Me craze, and it was kind of his next big project. And I think it was called 30 Days, where he spent 30 days living the life of another person. One episode, he left his ID, he left his money, he left all of his things at home, moved to a different area, and lived with a family of immigrants that were undocumented. And he kind of shared what that was like for him and gained a whole new understanding of that. Another episode he did like prison. I think he did 30 days in the hole, 30 days in solitary. And so does that perspective touch me? Absolutely. Does it change my thoughts and feelings about criminal activity or whatever? No, I still think criminal activity is wrong. But I had a whole new understanding and feeling about people who experience those things. You know what I'm saying? So it touched me, but it didn't necessarily change me, I guess is what I'm saying.
Well, and I was thinking more in terms of, somebody who sees the world. I don't know if I want to use your addict example, but let's just go with it for now. Somebody who uses even marijuana recreationally. I don't know. And they are really starting to get addicted and it's becoming a problem. You could talk to someone and they may have the perspective that marijuana is fine. There's no negative events. It has or impacts. It has nothing. It only has positives. Well, I can interact with someone. I can talk to them. I can even be their friend, but that doesn't mean I'm going to adopt that to my own perspective. Mm-hmm. But what that does do is that maybe solidifies, or maybe it reaffirms my own perspective and say, yeah, this is why I look at the world the way that I do. So again, my perspective is being touched by the interaction, but it's not being impacted or shifted or changed. That was probably one of the best examples that I could come up with on the fly, is just that difference, because I think that's so relatable. And I do have relationships in my life where there are some people that have a little bit more acceptance to that than what I might do. But that doesn't mean that there's not a relationship. That doesn't mean that there's not a friendship that can be there. But that what that does mean is I don't have to adopt their perspective to be my perspective. And again, that is I think that's the heart of kind of what we're talking about here is, you can interact with other people. You can see the world maybe from their lens, but you can also reject it and say, this is why I don't use this as my own perspective. Really quick to just do a segue here, because one of the things that you were talking about kind of made me go back in my memory bank. Do you remember and this is a while ago, do you remember the show Wife Swap?
I do. I loved that show.
So my wife and daughter recently, and I say within the last month, kind of been going through and rewatching all of those shows. And I've picked up an episode here or there just because, I've come downstairs or what have you. And I remember some of the episodes from when we watched them years ago when they were on. But what was really funny is I look at them a little bit different now because it is an experiment of perspectives. It is really taking two completely opposite people and putting them in each other's lives. And if you don't remember the show, they're there for 2 weeks. The first week is you have to abide by the rules of the mother that lived in the house that you went to. And then the other week, you get to change the rules the way you would have lived. And so the family gets to experience a whole different dynamic. And as you can imagine, it's great television because there was sometimes a lot of fighting. Sometimes there was a lot of tears. Sometimes there was this oddly weird comfort that would happen. I saw one episode where one mom was a working mom and they were out of the house 18 hours of the day and they never really got to see their kids. And she changed place with a stay-at-home mom who even raised or even homeschooled their kids. So she was around all the time. And it was weird to see that dynamic because the kids that were with their mom all the time suddenly enjoyed and had the freedom to be away from the parent because the mom, once she got to change the rules, was like, yeah, I'm not going to sit here and be with you all day long. Go do some stuff for yourself. And they loved it. And the weird thing is the children that were in the house that never saw their mom, when the wife there switched the rules and was around them all the time, both sides of the equation kind of just really naturally gravitated and landed into that new perspective very nicely. So it's kind of an interesting show to look at it when you're thinking through the term of perspective, because you can really start understanding the importance of looking at the world, not just through your lens, and really trying to understand there are other ways that people live and encounter situations and even go through times in our lives that might be different than us, but that doesn't make them wrong. That just makes them different. And if you have a chance to experience that firsthand, I take it. And that's exactly what this show did. So I kind of looked at it with fresh eyes, Jamie, for the first time, and really kind of looked at it through the lens of the power of you're really shifting these families' perspectives in a really fast and profound way. And it was really kind of cool to see that live in action.
Well, and I had never thought of it that way. I mean, that's exactly what happened. We're going to go experience someone else's life. We're going to share our life with them, and then we're going to see what happens afterwards, right? And what a great example that is perfect. I guess the other thing that I was thinking of, just to move us forward in the conversation, is things like what we choose to ingest, right? So not just who we spend our time with, but also what we take in. I don't know if you have anything to say about because I have so much to say about that. But just what are you ingesting that can shift your perspective?
Well, I think when you look across, there's a lot of, we can touch on a lot of different things. And I think the conversation could easily go to what's a positive, what's a negative. And I think that's important for us to touch on. But what's more important is to understand why I'll call them inputs. Why are these inputs coming in? Because the inputs that you're having in your life are going to be different than the inputs that I'm having into my life. And so to even recognize that we're all not self-feeding our perspectives the same way, which is why we have such a colorful array of unique perspectives across the globe. And that's why it's so hard also to say, why can't you see the world that I see it? It's so plainly obvious, why can't you see this point of view? And why don't you understand it? And really what we really need to be recognizing is I'm talking with an individual who the inputs that come into their perspective could be vastly different than mine. And because of that, they're not going to be able to see what I get to see. there's so much around the what we ingest and what we spend time in. I've mentioned this before. My faith and my religion is really important to me, and so that is a major factor that comes into my perspective. Whereas, we've talked, that might not be something that you really even gravitate towards, Jamie, and that might not be as strong of an input into your perspective as it is mine. There's already differences. And so I think when we get going on this topic that you want to dive into, which I love, I think to me, that's the one piece that I want to just call out into the room, is saying we all have different inputs that we either enjoy, gravitate towards, familiar with, or excited about, whatever it is. We all just have to understand that those inputs are not the same for everybody, and just don't ever assume that the what I consider to be important enough to feed into my perspective should be the same importance of what somebody else that I'm talking to for them, because that's usually not the case.
Yeah. Well, and I think about things like what I'm reading, what I'm listening to, what I'm watching, what I'm clicking on, things like that all play into perspective too. And I think what's interesting, when we choose to surround ourselves with people in a group, right? That is a space that we're choosing. We kind of know what to expect. When we start clicking, when we start looking and searching and, Googling and things like that, there is this, I don't know, I don't have any other word, but there's this insidious thing that not everybody knows is happening with, social media and the algorithms of websites and YouTube and stuff like that. And you all know, because I've said it a million ways from Sunday, TikTok is my favorite, right? I find so much enjoyment in hearing other people's experiences through TikTok. I'm also very aware that because of the things that I choose to click on, TikTok feeds me more of the same. And so it really starts closing off the ability that I have to access other perspectives, because it kind of pigeonholes me in what it thinks I like, right? So I lean more left, and most of the things that I get on my TikTok, on my YouTube, those kind of things, they're all pretty left leaning. So I know that if I want to understand your perspective, my friend, I've got to go outside of my own TikToks to find it. I need to go somewhere else to say, what is this? What does this look like for the other side? I need to be very thoughtful in my Google searching and things like that. And so I don't know that we always look at social media as a way of shaping our perspective, but when you're immersed in it and it becomes an echo chamber, it really can start shifting our perspective, and almost brainwash us a bit. That's a little bold, but I'm going to go there anyway. I feel like it can brainwash us.
Well, I'm just looking at the time, and I almost think, because you said something earlier too around perspective and perception. I think there's a conversation there. I think there's a conversation here around how, when I hear you say the word brainwashing, what comes to mind for me is when you have a perspective that's forced upon you, and maybe you don't know that it's being forced upon you. Narrow-mindedness is another thing. When you talk about somebody being narrow-minded, are they really narrow-minded, or is their perspective just not? And I know when we get into the semantics, when I say this next sentence, people are like, that's the definition of being narrow-minded. But when you're talking to someone whose perspective maybe isn't as open as yours, maybe it's not so much that we just label them as being narrow-minded, and so they're choosing to be this way. Maybe they just never had the same experiences, or maybe they've never taken the step back to really understand or talk or think through, how do other people live through their lives? I know of a friend of mine who, growing up, their parents kept a really tidy house and their dishes were always done. And they were told that if you have dishes left in your sink before you go to bed, that's just a sign of laziness. That's just lazy people. And they had a really good friend that they would go over to their house, and that friend's family was, a single mom, worked all the time, and there was some dirty dishes in their sink. The rest of the house was very clean, but there might have been some dirty dishes in the sink. And when they went over there, instantly they felt like, well, wow, these guys are really lazy because look, they have some dishes in the sink. When in reality, there's a whole other factor of things that are coming that are weighing in on that. And I use that as an example to say, was that person being narrow-minded? I would say yes, but do they know they're being narrow-minded? Because what kind of experiences have they had? Because if that's the only thing they've ever been told or they've only ever seen, they maybe not have had the opportunity to experience. There's other reasons why you have dishes in your sink at the end of the day. And that could be you're a single mom, you're trying your best, you have a house full of people who won't help you. Whatever the reasons are, it might not just be you're lazy. It might be a sign of having too much on their plate. So maybe they're instead of being lazy, they're overworked, right? Like there's a variety. Mm-hmm. So for me, when I hear that kind of stuff, it just makes me think there's so much to this that I think we should kind of focus on. I would love to break this out and do maybe this is a series. Maybe we can do other episodes where we focus on each one of these going forward. What do you think about that?
Well, definitely, I still have plenty on my list here that we were going to cover. And I don't know if our Talk About It Tuesday, or not our Talk About It Tuesday, sorry. I don't know if our food for thought just went a little long or if there's just that much, but I definitely think we should bring this back again. And I love the perception versus perspective idea too. Are those two different things? We'll have to talk about that.
I know.
So let's definitely bring this back.
Yeah, I know. That's exactly when you said that earlier. I wrote that down and I was like, okay, perspective versus perception. Holy moly, right? Because I'm like, right. Wow, that's quite a bit.
What you're experiencing, folks, is the rabbit hole that is Malin and I's conversations. This is what happens to us.
This is exactly what happens to us. I do want to say there is one article that I pulled up because I was just curious, and this article it's from a magazine, and the name of the article is "How Your Perspective Shapes Your Life." And I thought it had a really interesting list that I think it'd be kind of cool to kind of throw in here towards the end, because that was one of the questions that I was grappling with, right? Is, okay, I go after perspectives and it's important to me, but how does it shape our lives? And this article kind of puts a list together that just kind of talks about all the different factors that people can use or go through that will help shape their perspectives. I'm sure it's not all inclusive because I put that caveat on all of the articles that I reference, but I thought it was a good list anyways. So if you're interested, Jamie, I'll share the list real quick.
Please.
The article says that these are the items that they attribute to being more often people will go to help shape their perspective. Family background and upbringing. We kind of touched on that. Environmental factors. I think that one's interesting. I don't know if I would go to that myself, but I thought it was interesting. I don't know if you can relate to that or not. Culture and tradition. And you pulled up, we talked about tradition, right? We talked about the things that we are kind of told to do or we've done because that's just traditionally what happens. Religion and creed. There's religion. That's a strong one for me. Educational background. That kind of starts touching into, I went to college and that's when I really started feeling like my perspective was opening up, and that was in an educational environment. So social class or social status is another one that will help shape your perspective.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that.
And then your profession and your career, which I find that to be a huge part of my identity is what I do for a living. So that's no surprise to me that would be there. That would be used to help shape a person's perspective.
Yeah, that's a good list. A couple things that I hadn't thought of.
Well, and I think, I'm going to summarize the article, but it also goes into the importance of why we have perspectives and the kind of the mindset that we use. If you have a perspective that you're not going to be successful or you can never accomplish great things, you're going to start limiting yourself and you're going to start believing those. And then you're going to start producing less than what you're probably capable of versus somebody who's, I'm capable of a lot. I'm going to try a lot. The sky's the limit. My perspective is I'm amazing at a lot of what I do. Guess what? You probably will start producing more than you expect of yourself because your perspective allows you that room to do that, to try things. So it was a really neat article. It was kind of neat to just see some of those aspects. and I can't argue with them. I think perspective is important. We've said it before, and I'm sure we'll say it again, that it just has a huge impact onto so many facets of our life. And it's present in a lot of things. Even if we don't recognize it, it's always there. It's kind of like a silent partner that you carry with you everywhere you go, and you use it over and over again. Sometimes you don't even realize it. And another thing that we won't have time to get into, but I'm just going to throw this out there before I take my breath, is we also need to talk about the filters in which we use to either look through our perspective or build our perspective. We touched on a couple here, and even on that list, our ethics, our morals, our intellect, our beliefs. I mean, there's probably a lot of filters that go into that help shape or refine or adjust our perspectives that we haven't even touched on. So that's probably another area, Jamie, that we're going to have to at least crack open and kind of dig out a little bit.
Right. Well, and let's rein it in just a little bit for our listeners today. I guess if there's one thing that I could hope for, yes, I've got the hook on the side of the thing again, or Oscar music. If there's one thing that I hope we can take away from this week, is really to just be more aware of how our perspective has been shaped and what we're doing to shape our perspective currently. You know what I mean? To be aware of the things that are in the background happening that we may not even notice. We have focused a ton on seeking out those other perspectives. You're absolutely right. I think we've done an awesome job of seeking out other perspectives, because it's a passion for me. I love to hear stories from other people. I've even found some podcasts recently that I should tell you about at some point that are really doing that for me, just giving me some different stories and different experiences to understand. But then to think about, those are things that we're seeking. What is it that's just coming to us? You know what I mean? What are those things that are influencing us that we may not know about? And how are we filtering that? I think that's a really great question. So everybody have a little homework this week. Think about those things, be reflective about your perspective and where it comes from and where you're going with it as we, kind of work through some of these questions together. Cause I do think we have a lot we want to talk about in this subject. So we'll have to bring it back next time.
Yeah, we have so much. It's not even funny.
It's not funny, but it's really good stuff. So we're excited about it. But anyway, so I guess thanks everybody for joining us this week. It's been a bit of a whirlwind, but we're going to hone it in for next week and bring back some new information. And we hope you join us, and we appreciate you listening. So we'll see you again next time on Roundtable Mindset.
Thank you, everyone. See you next week.
Bye-bye. This podcast was recorded and edited by Jamie and Malin. Music by Famous Cats. If you have a topic you'd like us to discuss, please email us at roundtablemindset@gmail.com. Text or call us at 402-819-8999, or join the conversation on Facebook at Roundtable Mindset Podcast.
And never miss a new episode by making sure you like, subscribe, and share wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for being our guest today. See you next time at the Roundtable. And remember, your opinions and perspectives matter and are appreciated, but might not always be shared by others, and that's okay.